So Lana, besides being my friend and my co-founder, is also a community alchemist and also a learning design specialist with a solid background in training and education. And probably a lot of you already know this, but she's the author of Community Builder, Design Communities for Change. Here, it's amazing, actually. All of you should have it because you can do a lot of things with it. And of course, she didn't stop at one book. She also created the 90 Days Action Planner. This was a Kickstarter backup planner for creative entrepreneurs. And besides creating books, she's also helping and supporting entrepreneurs in different various areas, starting with ideation, curriculum design, community building, and personal development. And if this is not enough, she's actually doing more things. She's also the director for learning design and community from Dreamseedo. Dreamseedo is an online learning and community building platform from transformational leaders, NGOs, and community cultivators. And she still has time to dedicate her work to nonprofit organizations such as She Dares, Neurodiversity Foundation, and Shift Foundation. And this is an impressive CV, actually. I don't know when and besides all this, she's also doing bass. So I think it's time for me to shut up, go in the background, and just keep track of your questions. And I will give the floor to Lana.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you. I am so excited to be doing this session on designing communities for change. I would love to share my screen first. Let's see. As I share my screen, though, I wouldn't be able to see you. And what I'll do is I'll be stopping from time to time so that we would be able to communicate with each other. So I'll be asking some questions, and you can put that in the. Let me just do this. So I do hope you can now see my screen, and I'm looking at my right for the cue from Veronica. So welcome to Designing Communities for Change. Just to give you a bit of a overview of what this presentation workshop will be about. It will be about 4 different parts, and funny enough, I've got these parts covered in creating this presentation, and yet last night there was like this nudging in my ear. There's like, it's not yet complete, it's not yet there. So there are some tweaks that I did for today's presentation, and it would give you a bit of a framing in terms of how I see communities. So the first one we'll be doing is, what is your fondest memory of being part of a community? And I'll be sharing with you my memories of being in community with others, and then dive deep into terminologies on the definition of community, and then present what's this 3 different ways in which you can design for communities for change, and that is within the lens of starting with whom. So let's start first. What is your fondest memory of being part of a community? And I just want for you to just take a minute to think about it, to picture it in your head, to picture it in your mind. And at the same time, while you're reminiscing about this memory of community, think about where you feel it in your body and how you feel. So I'm gonna take off my screen again, and we'll get into a bit of a discussion on what is your fondest memory of being part of the community. So for Jenny, for Chris, for Dan, for Clarissa, for Karina, please type in the chat. And then also Veronica, what is your fondest memory of being a community? Or maybe yet, what comes to mind quickly when it comes to thinking about communities? Dan said shared interest and goals, learning and growing together, chatting to each other, creating together. So there's quite a lot of verbs there, right? Very interesting. Supporting each other, a feeling of belonging, shared backgrounds, energizing each other. There's not just that element of action, of sharing, feeling, supporting, but there's also that element of us being with each other. So shared values. And I'd like for you to ask yourself this question, when you think about the communities that you're part of, how do you feel? What's the feeling that you get by being part of these communities? Wow, oh, that's so nice. We can maybe add something. Vulnerable and true, yeah. The spaces where we can vulnerable are really the spaces where we can be really ourselves. So that's so nice to read, Stephanie. What other feelings that is does it generate? Just thinking about communities and at the same time, of those memories that you have. Where do you feel it in your body? Warm feeling. Do you feel it in your belly? Do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it? Do you feel your what's this? Your lips forming that smile. So one of the things that I love doing is to also really incorporate this awareness of how being part of communities affect us. So energy, happiness, warm feeling, hmm, tingles all over my body. So I would like to share my own experience with communities. And again, and share with you my story. So I'm Lana Jelenjev. I would say that three common threads around my life would be contribution, connection, and learning. So connection is I love building authentic relationships. A big part of my life's journey has been to really focus on the connections that I'm building with people and how my circles of connection can help me and also others in terms of bringing out impactful ideas and impactful projects. And not just that, it adds into that contribution piece of owning the energy you bring in the room, which one of my mentors shared with me. So for me, a big piece of what I do is really to look at how am I, and this is the visualization that I had even as I was, yeah, teenager. I used to have this visualization of myself as a pebble, and you can throw a pebble in a river, in a pond, and then create that ripples. So for me, that is how I live my life, being that pebble thrown and creating ripples and contributing to with whichever space that I am in. And a big part of my life is learning. Once an educator, always an educator. So I've been in the field of education for quite a long time. So I've helped put up schools, put up curriculum programs, worked as a center director for street children. So a lot of the things that I've been doing ever since, I would say, has something to do with learning. And up until now, this is one part or one pillar of the things that I do for Dreams You Do is really helping organizations create impactful learning experience design with their programs. So this is my story. And when I think about, my fond memories of community, I'm also reminded of this definition by Fabian, and he's also one of my inspiration when it comes to community building. And he said the community is a group of people that care about each other and feel they belong together. And perhaps this is also what your notions of community is about, which is also why it's interesting. What is our definition of community? How can we define it? And today, this is something that we would be focusing on. But first, let me give you a glimpse of my memories of being in community. Like what I said, I had the presentation created, and yet last night there was a tinge of no, it's not yet complete. And I think the completeness there was coming in from that I cannot talk about community if I don't talk about myself. And as you can see, this is a picture of me being baptized, and that's my mom there. And if we think about communities, we grow up in communities. We are born in communities, we die in communities. And this is one of the photos that I looked at last night. Not last night, at 1 o'clock in the morning, just because I really had this urge of no, there needs to be something that I can share about my memories of being in community. That's not just about the work that I'm doing right now. So other memories of being community would be again the family, the family structures that we have. This is a photo of when we were, when we went back to the Philippines. This is for the first time, and the these are the generation of my grandma's siblings. So my grandma is the one in blue right in front of me, and these are her siblings. And my grandmother has been my superwoman. She has helped us grow up. She was there for us. And when my mom got sick, we were living with her, and she took care of her. And in essence, she's the matriarch in the family. She was the matriarch in the family, and everything that I knew about being with others and being in community with others, I look up to her and how she lived her life. She had a small store right in front of the house. In the Philippines, we call it a sari sari store, and people will be flocking there, of course, to buy things. And when we grew up, it was fascinating how children who grew up in the area would still go to her store and talk to her and tell about stories on how she would, yeah, ask them to bug off, or what's this the things that she would tell to them when they were young. So there was quite a lot of reminiscing, and I can remember that our you know that small space that she had, that her sari sari store became one of the pillars in community, mainly because it was a place of convening. People will be joining in and out, uh, buying things from her, but just not just buying, but to really have conversations. So that was one, good example of how spaces for convening can really influence us in, yeah, our feelings of being in community. Of course, another would be the friendships that we cultivate, right? This is when we start extending ourselves, our notion of who we are outside of ourselves, and bringing in other people. As you can see, I think that was when we were in second year high school, if I'm not mistaken. So very young. Um, and these two ladies are my uh, high school best friends up until now, are close friends, best friends. And when we think about friendships, this is now that extension, extending ourselves and our being with others. And that, extension of ourselves really got tested for me when I moved out of my own turf. So I lived in Indonesia, worked in Indonesia for some time, but that was different. That was a choice in a sense of a career move. But 13 years ago, I moved here in the Netherlands for love. So a lot of people, when they ask me why are you here, I would say I'm a love pact. I came in the Netherlands to be with my partner, to be with my husband, and my notion of community really got tested. Coming in from a very extended environment, now I was entrusted in this new environment where I didn't know anybody except for my husband and his family. And that was it. I didn't have any career, I didn't have any friends. So the idea of community really got me thinking of, okay, if I don't have that, then might as well, create it. And I've created a community called Samen Leven, which basically is living together in Dutch. And this were a group of women who were married to Dutch partners. And they were connected through, was this to me through a blog post that I wrote before when I came here in the Netherlands. And yeah, we met monthly, have birthdays together. And I'm sharing a photo here of one of our friends leaving. And what's this? We surprised her in her birthday. And she lived probably an hour away from most of us. So not really that, easy distance. And yet what we did was, it was her birthday, and we knew that she was feeling homesick, and we surprised her. So that was a photo of us by their by their wall window, and the look in their faces when they saw us being there. So being part of the community really is now defined not just with spaces, it's the connections that we intentionally form. And again, that intention forming has brought me to meeting, a wonderful group of women. This was the circle that a circle of women that was present for my 40th birthday. And I would say that if there's anything, that I treasure most in my life are the relationships that I have with people. Again, the connector that I am. And this for me is, again, that sense of belonging, that sense of care, that sense of being part of something bigger. So you probably couldn't see me, but I'm the person there right in the middle with somebody's hand on top of my head. And that was a very meaningful celebration of life for me. And the reason also was because um, being 40 was a big milestone, considering that at age 37 I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So that for me was a big leap in celebrating myself in community with others. And again, if you don't have it, you create it. And this has been my idea of when I started getting into treatments when I was diagnosed. I couldn't find the space where I can just be me. And I like when, one of the things that Stephanie said about vulnerability and being true, that I found in a space that I co-created along with my friend Natalie, and that's She Dares. So this is now that getting into that online space as well. So She Dares is this Facebook community where women from different parts of the globe communicate with each other, talk about very vulnerable stuff, from menstruation to divorce to even the mundane, just being there and being present to what is alive in us as women. And this is a photo of one of the She Dares red dinners. So as you can see, everybody's wearing red. And it's a potluck dinner that we used to hold pre-corona, of course, um, that we used to hold in a face-to-face event. And the sense of belonging, the sense of fullness, and considering what Veronica also said, the wholeness is something that is very much palpable when we do the red dinners. Women that go out within the, those that have participated in the red dinners have that, big sense of fullness in their lives. And this is a photo of me, as you can see, bald. This was when I was going through chemotherapy. And next to me is a guy called Scott Dinsmore. And he's one of the highly watched, he had one of the highly watched TED Talk on Living Your Legend. So he's the creator of Live Your Legend. He his group, his program was the first program that I've been part of that I felt a community with, people who are sharing the same passion of living their legends and in different ways, and in the work that you're doing with family. And he started this group, what's this, and created chapters in different what's this, in different cities, and I was part of the city chapter here in Amsterdam. And when he came here in the Netherlands, of course, it for me it was just like an easy invitation to, would you want to, would you want to have dinner with us? And he said yes. And this was a very memorable dinner, not just because of the impact that his Live Your Legend community had in with me, but most of all, it was that sense of, hey, I'm inviting someone in our home, and that feeling of, oh, this is, this is a special event. It's a dinner, but it's a special event of inviting someone in one's home. And that's when I realized that the dinners that I have, or the dinners that we have, or the parties that we have at home are very essential in that sense of community building, because the type of conversations that went at that day, at that night, was so deep that if I recall it up until now, I just feel so much happiness thinking about Scott. Unfortunately, not long after this photo, he passed away in an accident while he was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And that for me was also that deep sense of, yeah, understanding that we can welcome people in our lives in different ways, even strangers, and even, yeah, even those that you just meet once can have so much influence in how you are and how you be with others. Here's a photo of the Community Weavers Guild while we had our face-to-face event in Spain last year, and uh, this is again another experience of community that I've had, wherein people that I didn't even know, I was invited through a friend, and that was my first time that I was in a small group with people that I didn't know, with community leaders from different parts of the globe. And there was this just intense, 4 days of being together, and knowing each other's work and supporting each other, um, being in grief circles together. So there was so much depth in this activity, in this experience, that I realized that that sense of community is something that can also be triggered by gatherings, by events. And at the same time, how do you nurture it? How do you keep it going? Here's a photo of the Facebook community builders, one of our activities, which is a case clinic. And again, these are different experiences of communities that I am, constantly being part of, not just virtually, but also face to face. And then, of course, this is base, the community that we're now starting to build, for scale ups, and how we're longing to have that space for scale ups, for founders, for uh, what's this, for decision makers, for visionaries to be in, so that we can learn, explore, be inspired, and create these dialogues together. So these are just, and like I said, these are the things that really popped up for me as things to share as my memories of being in community. And now we go into a bit of a technical part of this. And I've always been asked, what do you mean by community? What is your definition of community? And for me, when I think of communities, I'm reminded of two major concepts. And these concepts are very much embedded in the Filipino psychology. So you might think, Filipino psychology, what does that even mean? Is there even difference in, common psychology? So Filipino psychology started out as a point of inquiry with regards to the indigenous language and practices of the Filipinos. And Virgilio Enriquez, which is the father of Filipino psychology, started this in the 1960s, wherein he was like, the words that people use to define how Filipinos are not exactly, how indigenous, or at least, how we've been practicing it. So there was this massive, massive trying to understand, what are the different languages, the different terms that can really represent what, Filipino psychology is about. And when I think of communities, I see them as the roots of our loob and kapwa. So I'm gonna go through a bit of a technical part of this. So bear with me, and I do hope it also steers in you some point of inquiry within your own, your own language, within your own culture, in terms of where communities are rooted. So when we think of loob, it's inside. If we translate it, broadly, it's the inside. It is made up of our katauhan, which is our personality, and it is also made up of our character, which is our pagkatao. And in each part, there are different ways that it manifests itself. So, like, say, for example, when we think of our katauhan, it is about our consciousness, our internal or external sensitivities, or it can be our behaviors, our tendencies, or our habits. So, it's our malay, our dama, and ugali. And each one has a different orientation as well. So when we look at consciousness or awareness, this is the awareness that we have about our environment. How do we know what's going on in the spaces that we're in? And at the same time, there's also an internal component to it, which is pagbabalik loob, returning to one's true self, which for me was like, wow, just to getting into that, that word that we have our malay, we have our consciousness that allows us to know what's in the environment, and at the same time allows us to return back to ourselves. That for me is a very deep understanding of, the Filipino psyche and the psyche of, people in general. There's also Dhamma, again, that has an internal and external dimension to it. And this is, again, the sensitivity that you have, the emotions, the sensations, and the desires. That you can see it in your surroundings, or it could also be something that for you yourself, you feel, like when I ask you about how you feel about thinking about communities, where do you feel it in your body? So this is the sensitivity to what is going on inside of you, which you do when you check in and when you try to look at your internal weather. And then lastly, when we look at our katauhan, we look at it in terms of our ugali, our behaviors, our tendencies, our habits, which can be biological, which also, can be part of our will, and our decision making. So when we're looking at our ugali, we tend to look at it in terms of things that can be there already, and things that, or behaviors that we intentionally choose. So there's that component of having it as part of our will or our decision making process. So if I think about it, going back to loob as our personality, what about katauhan? What about pagkatao? What is pagkatao all about? Uh, and this is where we can look at those three different areas. First one is, I don't know if you can hear the notifications that are coming in. Should have taken it out. So there's three things: our isip, our mind; our bait, which is our goodness; and our kalooban. So when we're really thinking about our character, we have our intelligence, our wisdom, our reasoning, and we also have our affirmations or our stance in things. That's all part of our mind, our isip, pag-iisip. And then when we look at goodness, knowing what is acceptable, knowing what is not acceptable, it remains not just on a neutral basis or a natural basis, but it also becomes something personal. So how can we be intrinsically good, or critically good? So there's again that will aspect there. And then kalooban is really about the moral, will that we have that is intentional, which is kusa, that is already there, which is sadya, or it is decided on, pasya, So there is a moral will that can be there already, but there's also a moral will that says, oh, I can decide on it. So given this, the intricacies of the loob, of the self, is so fascinating. There's so many gradients, there's so many variances to understanding, oh, how do I make decisions as a person, how do I do things, how do I behave, So loob is that essence of your own internal systems, and how it also represents with your own character and with with your personality. Now I said, community is both loob in kapwa, and kapwa now integrates another layer to understanding the Filipino psyche. I'd like to quote Virgilio Enriquez in saying, that kapwa is a recognition of a shared identity, an inner self shared with others. So even just that line, of this is our shared identity, this is an inner self that shared with others. That for me drops in already quite a load of what being in kapwa means, because it's not just linguistically about the unity of the self, but it's the unity of the self in relation to others, you know and this is a big thing, because when we start looking at this from this lens of how am I in unity with myself and with the other, we're looking at it as starting from our own selves, from our family to our circle of friends, and expanding it to a practice of peace, that we are all kapwa people. And when I read this, I still get goosebumps reading about Virgilio Enriquez's words, and his works, mainly because it really symbolizes, that we have this shared identity that is not just about ourselves, but it's also something that we share with others. And then before we jump into some more experiential parts, I just want to share that there's two categories to the kapwa, which is the ibang tao and hindi ibang tao. So the ibang tao are the outsiders, and when we're thinking about outsiders, how we behave with them are based on civility, our pakikitungo. So it means, yeah, you're introduced to them. How do you behave in the right demeanor towards them or towards authorities? There's also the act of mixing, so it has a social component to it, and mainly it espouses the ability to adapt in different situations. So say for example, you're put in a five-star restaurant. How would you eat in a five-star restaurant? So pakikisalamuha, it's the act of mixing, um, has that adaptation component to it. And then lastly is the act of joining. So when we're with ibang tao, with the outsider, it translates to how can we participate? How can we join? And I'm one of the biggest example of pakikisalamuha, pakikitungo, and also pakikilahok. would be the Filipino version of the Filipino term bayanihan. So this is an artwork by one of the famous Filipino artists, Carlos Botong Francisco, that depicts how Filipinos from a long time ago would move houses. So it literally means being a bayan, meaning town, and it's used to the spirit of communal unity and cooperation. So as you can see, what they would do, because the houses were made of nipa huts, they would put on bamboo rods underneath, and people, the villagers would help carry that house over to where it needs to be moved. And bayanihan has always been this what's this expression of being in communal unity and cooperation. And this is why for me it's so fascinating to look at kapwa in terms of how we behave with each other, we mix with each other, we join in activities with each other. And then the last part of kapwa, is the hindi ibang tao. So these are the one of us. These are probably people that are, part of your organizations, part of your team, part of your inner circle of relationships. And when we are in this inner circle of relationships with these people, there's an act of mutual trust, pakikipagpalagayang loob. There's an act of joining others, pakikisangkot. And then there's the act of being one with others, which is pakikipagkaisa. And when we look at this in these broad terms, so it's not when we're looking at the shared identity and that shared experience with others, so it's not just people, it's not just those that are hindi ibang tao, but also those that are ibang tao. Those are those people that are also considered to be outsiders. And which is why for me, when I think of, the deepest meaning that I can give when it comes to community, it's that, it's the combination of being in ourselves, our loob, and being and sharing that loob with others, which is the kapwa. And communities are our deathbed. That's the bedrock of where our loob and our kapwa flourishes. This is where what's this? This is where our identities, our character, our personalities. This is where our kapwa have experience. So I'll pause here, and we'll think, of just imagine what our lives, our society, and our world will be like if we, parents, children, leaders, followers, employers, politicians, and citizens practice pakikipagkapwa. Yeah, that understanding of sharing ourselves and, not just with ourselves, but also with others. And I'll pause here, so that let's just take a moment to imagine that, of how would that be if we can integrate, that understanding of, and understanding and appreciation of those that are outsiders and those that are, not outsiders. So let me just pause a bit. So if I, would want to ask you, how does that sit with you? This understanding. Yes, there would be less crime, more compassion, understanding, patience for others. Clarissa, indeed, it is expansive, because now we're not narrowing that, what's this, that sharing just within our circle, but also outside of that. And this is what, when I was thinking about, how best to share with you my lens on communities, it really resonated with me to share, the framing, the framework that I've, grew up in. Being a Filipina, this is the framework that I grew up in. And I was fortunate enough also to have studied in one of the premier universities where this point of inquiry on the Filipino psychology was really a big, what's this, a big thing. So for me, it has really been a wonderful uh, exploration in terms of how do we find ourselves in community, and that understanding of our loob and our kapwa, and that being rooted, deeply rooted in the communities that we're in. And yes, I do agree, less depression and loneliness. Clarissa, indeed, these are average Filipino terms. However, yeah, there's the disclaimer to it. These are average Filipino terms, and one of the reasons why there was really a massive push for Filipino psychology was that realization that because of colonization, we've been under the Spanish rule for 300 years, and then even after that, the Americans. So because of colonization, the terminologies have been tainted. How people have perceived the wording became so much different from how the indigenous have experienced it before. So this is also why, yeah, in the study of Filipino psychology, it's fascinating to go into how the colonized view sees it, the terms, and how the indigenous people sees it. Again, these are terms that are rooted within the indigenous practices. So this is also why for me this is interesting to somehow, again, like a pebble, drop it on the on what's this drop it on the ground, see what steers. It's the same that I would want, for those who are joining here, to say, how is it with my own, with my own language? How is it with my own experiences with my country, with my people? So this is, again, this is a different framing that I would want to share. So now we'll go to a bit more practical, and this is really now for, so now what, now that we understand that communities are part of ourselves and that shared identity with others, how then can we start designing communities for change? So I have three tools that I would like to share, and those three tools I would also be, yeah, sharing easily. They're also here in the community builders book, um, in which the framing again is very much different to mainstream community building. So let me just start sharing. Okay, there you go. So the framing that I have when it comes to designing for what's this, communities, especially communities for change, has one major component, and that is we start with who. I am fortunate enough to have a mentor, and part of a community with Michelle Bachman, and he wrote this wonderful piece on start with who. Yeah, and I can share the link later on. With that, in that for me was started this point of inquiry of, wait a minute, it is that, when we're looking at communities, when we're looking at how we are in community, the main thing that we have to consider are the people. Who are we designing for in the first place? So for me, it's understanding, who are we designing for, and what is the pathway, where are they in their life stories, in what they're doing, so that we can be able to understand what best is suited for them, or how best we can design the communities for, with them, not just for them, with them. So the Satter change model is one of these framings that I use with my client work, and it really talks about this understanding of the different stages that people go in. And probably you would notice it by now, that our late status quo was pre-COVID. This is life before COVID happened. And COVID COVID-19 was that foreign element that really got us out of our comfort zone. It really cut us out from our late status quo and entrusted us in this space of chaos. And in this space of chaos, we're trying out new things, increasing our involvement, we're experimenting because we want to get out of this funk, we want to get out of this chaos. And by doing things, actively and intentionally looking for solutions, we then get to a state where we're like, oh, maybe this is something that I need to do. And that's that transforming idea jumpstarts us, in a new way of practice and integration. And hopefully by then, it gets us to a new status quo. And then the cycle again continues. So when we start with who, we start with where are people in this pathway, where can we find them? And this is one of that big lens of really looking at, understanding where people are. And of course, we've always been told that it's very important to know and peel the layer of needs. What is that obvious need? What are the hidden needs? What are the super hidden needs? And this is one common practice. However, aside from the needs, one of the things that I would want to really emphasize on is amplifying the strengths. Alongside the needs, we need to also think about, you know, what are the inherent strengths of these people? Yeah, what are within their ecosystem? What are their values? What are the obvious resources? And what can be the potential resources? And when we look at these two lenses of needs and strengths, then we get a fuller picture, because we're not looking at only from a point, from a space of deficit, what they lack, but we're also looking from a lens of what are they abundant with. And that for me is a very important, understanding of when we look at communities, when we design for communities, we look at who are they, where are they in their, where are they in their journey, and what are their needs, and what are the available strengths. And this for me are the three, if there's anything that you can, that you can try immediately with your communities right now, is to just do these three things, map the pathway, understand their needs, and then amplify those strengths. Well, for some, it might also be even just identifying the strengths, as I know this is a new mindset, of what's this, bringing in the strengths to the forefront. And with that, I do hope that it has given you new things to think about when it comes to community building, new ways of defining communities, and at the same time, strategies that you can immediately implement when it comes to designing communities for change. So please do connect with me. Here is my LinkedIn. You can find me at Lana Jelenjev. That's my preferred channel. You can also email me through Base. That's also one channel. Or you can also check the work that we do at DreamSeeDo, which is at dreamseedo.org. So with that, we're going for question and answer.
Thank you, Lana. This was amazing. And I'm fascinated by the terminology, because when we start Base, actually, we start defining what a scale-up means for us and asking people, but it's the same for every single thing that you do. First, you need to make sure you are on the same page and you basically discuss about the same things and same values. And I do want to know more about this. So definitely we're going to have a follow-up discussion. But enough about what I'm interested in, and I want to see some questions from the attendees. So please type them in, and I'm going to ask Lana your question and she will answer it. I saw a lot of comments here. Oh, I see a question from Clarissa. Are there terms that our average Filipino would know? Sorry, I just need more coffee. So-
I answer that.
oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, any other questions? In that case, maybe will be great to see, how do you see the difference between, like, you have so many types of communities, and we have the base community that's more business oriented, but you also shared about more family oriented or friend oriented communities, like she theirs is more a support group, let's say. Do you see any differences between a business community and a more human community, if that makes any sense, if I can say that? So one is more for you as a human, and one is more business oriented. Do you think they are different? Do you think they act the same? Do you think there's any difference between those?
Okay. So good question, Veronica. And again, the terminologies are important. Right now, we have the terminology of brand communities that are that are coming in based from that, that understanding that there are businesses that have their own, community in that sense. For me, my lens is, that there are different types of communities that we can see. There's the communities of inquiry, communities wherein, there's a shared information that happens. Communities of inquiry is also related to, learning, learning processes. And there's also communities of practice wherein what's this? You have a specific topic or specific domain, and you'd want to really integrate and learn more about that topic. So, a good example of a community of practice would probably be like, what's this? Something related to knitting, or specific crafts. So there's a specific skill that you'd want to practice and integrate. And then there's also what's this? There's also communities of belonging. Like what you said, she dares is a community of belonging. You know, um, Clubs, fraternities to an extent. These are examples of communities of belonging. Wherein, we have that sense of care and belonging to a specific, specific group. And then we have also communities for change. These are more on having social mandates. These are communities that are geared towards changing something. Either, say for example, the Black Lives Movement. It's a very good example of a community that is geared towards change. So for me, these are the different, these framings in terms of communities that I personally look at, and each community can have more, of course. Uh, However, like for brand communities, one of the things that I encourage client partners to do and to think of is the lens of how can we shift from being transactional to transformational. So that's a different lens as well, because what we're seeing right now, and let's face it, Facebook has really shifted that terminology of community, gearing towards brand communities. So how can we shift that? How can we shift that notion of community as something that we get revenue from, or what's this? Have our return of investment, or that we're growing because that will grow our audience. Um, I'd want to invite people to take that out, of not having an ROI KPIs in terms of your profit based from your community, because that is transactional. That you're there, you're creating that, you're building that so that you can get something. And that takes out that essence of kapwa, pakikipagkapwa. So how can we shift that to make it transformational in such a way that we're looking at things collaboratively, we're engaging other voices in the room, that leadership is dispersed and not just controlled by one person or one organization with a specific agenda. That we're looking at power within the community as something that is healthy, So there's different, there's different things that we can do, and that for me is where the excitement is. That's the excitement of being a community alchemist, and why I chose the word alchemist. Alchemy is transformation. So how can we transform, this notion of communities that we have right now because of this, the social media that we're in, and then go back, to the more indigenous, to the more, what's this, lived definitions of communities that we have before, and make it transformational. So that for me is that, that's the exciting part, of doing the how.
Thank you. And definitely it's changing the perspective that you have on communities, and it's much broader than the common sense, actually. And we do have a question. I think this will be the final question from Clarissa. And her question is the following. When kicking off a community from scratch, how do you balance what the community wants or asks for, and what can you give as a leader?
Thank you for that, Clarissa. And I would definitely want to bring in this understanding of health within the communities. And Michelle and Fabian, I've been part of their community. Uh, what's this? Impact Weavers journey and learning journey. And one of the things that they really emphasize in their work is the health of the community. And there is no health within the community if there's no health within the leaders, or the source within the community. So when you think about balancing, what the community asks and what you can give as a leader, it's really about thinking, what are my boundaries, as the source for the community, because as a leader, you're the source for the community, or as the person who initiated the community, you're the source. So what are my boundaries as the source? And if these are things that I cannot give, then how is it possible for others to fill in that gap? So bringing in other people, alongside, creating that inner circle would be important, because then, you're not making the community needs be dependent on what you can provide. And I do hope this gives you in this, what's this, in this mindset of who are the other voices that we can bring in, who are the other people that we can collaborate with, that we can partner with, that we can strategically, create this, community with. And when you do that, when you get into this mindset, then there's also this thinking of, I don't have to be the one to drive the community. Yeah, the community will drive itself. So our goal is, again, moving from that direction, from transactional to transformational. I do hope that gives you some things to think about, Marisa.
So beautifully said. And I see a lot of nice comments here, and I'm pretty sure Lana, we're going to come back to all of you. And knowing her, she's open to connecting. So go and check her LinkedIn profile and send her a message. We are the entire day here, both of us presenting. So feel free to chat us. You also have the option to send a message privately to the person. And if you check, there's a Dream Seed Juice stand. Then if you click on the button, probably, actually, Lana will be able to respond to any questions. Lana, do you want to add anything else?
For those interested, you can look at the expo for Dreams We Do. That's the online learning and community platform, where, we support different organizations in creating impactful learning communities. And then there's also, the book for those who are interested to dive more in the, what's this? This is a different version of the book, will not be with the rings. So I can also share the link to, to that later on. This is specifically for those who want to get started in community building, because mainly it's a workbook, it's a toolkit, And with that, yeah, it has been a pleasure to be sharing my lens on community building with everyone. And I do hope that, like a pebble in a pond, I've thrown some, pebbles to start steering this notion of communities as the roots of our loob in pakikipagkapwa. Thank you, everyone.